Hi, my name is Mario Veen, and this is probably the last episode of this podcast. Although, as the Dutch writer Multatuli said, nothing is entirely sure, and maybe not even that. We'll discuss an article about what may be the most important discipline of philosophy to focus on in medical education: philosophy of technology. The article is called Technical Difficulties: Teaching Critical Philosophical Orientations Towards Technology, by Benjamin Chin-Yee, Laura Nimmon, and myself. This article was published as part of the Philosophy in Medical Education series of the journal Teaching and Learning in Medicine. It will also be part of the edited volume that Anna Cianciolo and myself are publishing in August. This book is called Helping a Field See Itself: Envisioning a Philosophy of Medical Education, and you can order it through the link in the description. Dr. Benjamin Chin-Yee is a PhD candidate in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge, and a hematologist in the Division of Hematology at Western University, Canada. Ben's research examines the impact of technology on the patient-physician relationship and how to integrate values and evidence to improve clinical decision-making. Dr. Laura Nimmon is scientist at the Center of Health Education Scholarship and Associate Professor of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia in Canada. Her research explores the social and relational aspects of learning and professional practice in medicine. Before we start, Laura would like to make this acknowledgement on behalf of Ben and Laura.
I would like to acknowledge that I am grateful to work at the University of British Columbia's Point Grey campus, which is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Slay-wa-tuth people.
Let's just start where we are. I'm in the Netherlands. I'm in Gouda. Maybe you know it from the Gouda cheese, the yellow round cheeses, well, they make them here. Wow. And where are you, Laura?
I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia. So right near the ocean, and we have lots of mountains. I can see mountains from my window here in my office, so feeling pretty grateful.
That's lovely. I'm in London, Ontario, which is in southwestern Ontario, in Canada, and I'm currently in the lab right now. So no windows or mountains here, but lots of machines humming in the background. So hopefully you won't pick those up on the recording today.
Well, it actually fits the theme of our paper great, because we're talking about technical difficulties, technology. We're in the lab, which has a lot of machines, and it's kind of inescapable, right? Technology in medical education. Apparently, we found it so important that we wanted to write a paper about it for the philosophy series of Teaching and Learning in Medicine. Yeah, so Ben, can you tell a little bit maybe about your background, what you're doing now, and what your interest was in writing this paper?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm Ben Chin-Yee, and I'm a hematologist by training. Also currently doing my PhD in philosophy in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Cambridge. I have a longstanding interest in philosophy of medicine and philosophy of science, and recently had an interest in sort of applying philosophical ideas to critically think about emerging medical technologies. And Mario, I think that's how we connected initially and got talking about some of these topics. And I was really excited to have the opportunity to work on this paper with both of you and explore some more of these ideas.
Yeah, you wrote, I think we connected because also you wrote a chapter for the other philosophy book, as we call it, the other philosophy in medical education book, which was also about the role of technology. So why do you think this technology, because you're also studying medicine, so you're also very practical oriented, why does it need a philosophical approach?
Yeah, I think that modern medicine today is ripe with technologies that are almost being applied and incorporated into clinical practice faster than we can keep abreast of. And things in the clinical world tend to happen quite fast. You know, there's sick patients that need to be cared for. There's increasing challenges in our health system that we're trying to address, and this often leads to rapid integration of technological approaches that don't always necessarily come with the more slow, critical, thoughtful approaches that that I think philosophy can can give us in order to kind of think about some of the broader impacts and potential pitfalls of applying some of these technologies in clinical practice. And so that's why I turned to philosophy in the first place, was because I was really interested in kind of interrogating at first sort of aspects of medical knowledge that we kind of took for granted in clinical practice. And this quickly extended to thinking about other aspects of medical practice, including the technological aspects. And so I do think that we're really at a critical juncture in medical practice that it would really be critical to be able to apply some of these approaches to scrutinize some of the technologies that are increasingly being deployed in healthcare today.
Laura, can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Dr. Laura Nimmon. I'm a scientist at the Center for Health Education Scholarship here at UBC. And I can't actually recall how I became a part of this group. I think it was from an email from you, Mario. And you'd read a paper that I'd written and you thought I'd be a good fit. But I thought, oh wow, that topic's so interesting. And so working with you both, even though I don't have a background in philosophy, for me was really interesting. Because I'm really actually interested in more of like the social and relational aspects of health professions education and medical education. And, we live in this kind of world now where everything is sort of technologically mediated. And so human beings are kind of entangled with technology every day and almost every moment. And so in medicine, of course, and in medical education, health professions education, it's not going to fade away. It's just going to become more and more present. And so I was really drawn to the kind of conversation when you invited me by taking this more philosophical and critical approach to how we think about technology. And I think it's really useful because it kind of has us examine new and entrenched assumptions regarding best practices. And I think it encourages us to kind of take on this way of thinking, which to me is really interesting. And I think, it's not just technology. I think with kind of any new tool, we always need to think about, what are the assumptions and kind of how are we using this new technology or new tool, or even, if you think of like language as a tool, for example, I think it's always important that we think critically. And so the question that we ended up asking together, I'll just tell the audience when we wrote the paper, was how do we prepare trainees to critically assess technologies that we cannot foresee and effectively use technology to support equitable and compassionate care? And so that question for me was really interesting to grapple with together and have more of kind of a meta conversation. And just to think about how we can use technology productively and ethically, and not just kind of with this neutral acceptance and unconscious engagement. So for me, joining the group and like bringing in our different perspectives, I think gave me an opportunity to think that way together and was definitely really fruitful.
Yeah, it was nice with all these different perspectives on technology. And yeah, the point you also make is that we say right at the beginning of the paper that when you say technology, it's such a broad term and everyone has these images with it. And probably if you hear the word technology, the images that come up in your mind are new technologies or recent technologies like VR glasses or X-ray machines or something like that. But yeah, we say right in the beginning of the paper that hand washing is a technology as well. It's pretty radical. I mean, and it's pretty recent as well, apparently. That's one of the things I learned in the paper, that it wasn't until like the 1980s that it was accepted. Yeah, in the United States, only from the 1980s, the first national hand washing guidelines emerged. That's pretty recent, but this whole thing with running water and tap and gloves and soap and everything that we got really used to in COVID as well. I mean, that's very low tech, but it's still technology as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I remember really well why I invited you, because I read this paper. You have to remind me of the name, but the concept you introduced there is technification.
Mm-hmm.
The paper was like caring or curing.
The technification of medical expertise.
Yeah.
In medical education. Yeah.
So that's another example where, so technology, I mean tables and computers and buildings, and that's very broad conception of technology. But technification also means that it's a kind of way of relating to each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I talk in that paper about how, right now we really operate under this sort of orientation that there's, the goal I think is sort of a technification of medical expertise. And I talk about how we frame that as human social activity that functions as a procedural or diagnostic skill designed to gather data about the patient and determine what aspect of the patient requires curing. Um, but I think, part of that paper, I talk about how we think about expertise needs to be framed as more of a delicate balance of both technical and relational. So that paper talks a bit about that. But I think that paper that I wrote is why I was invited into this group, just to kind of deconstruct a little bit more how we think about technification and the importance of relationality.
Ben, could you talk a little bit about the way technology is usually approached in medical education and in medicine?
Sure thing. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the growing role of technology, I mean, I keep using these terms like growing role or that we're, at a critical point, but like we've already pointed out and we point out in the paper as well, technology has always been there in medicine, right? It's taking on new forms and we argue in the paper that it's accelerating. And so now I think there is an increasing awareness of this in medicine and in medical education that there's a need to grapple with this, which is the big motivating factor for our paper. But I think that, as Laura sort of alluded to, the at least usual way that technology is approached in medicine is in this more neutral way, where it's seen as sort of something that's always in the background, something that is a tool that can be straightforwardly applied to solve particular problems that we face in healthcare. This in the paper we refer to as the positivist view of technology, which is a term that's been applied in some of the philosophy of technology literature, which really sees technology as sort of the straightforward application of science to solve problems, social problems, healthcare problems, or whatever problems faced by human beings. But it's seen as a straightforward and rational extension of science in this way that really is a tool for enabling effective control and manipulation of the environment. And this view, which I think is commonplace, is one that's increasingly being challenged by many scholars. But it's one that I think is increasingly it's a view that I think needs to be challenged also in medicine, because we're increasingly seeing how technology can incorporate various values and these can often have fairly significant consequences in how they're used and the downstream effects they have for practitioners and patients and communities.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, we use a couple different examples in the paper. One example that I think people like to talk about and like to talk about a lot is the electronic health record, which, according to sort of this neutral view, can be seen simply as an extension of advances in computing and various sciences that have underwritten, the technologies that make that underwrite that technology that makes the electronic health record possible, as a sort of straightforward means of collating masses of data and organizing data in such a way that it can be applied to improve patient care and to provide patient care. But as anyone who's used an electronic health record, various electronic health records realize that the specific goal of using an electronic health record to improve patient care is not always a straightforward one, and there's additional choices that go into designing and creating a technology like an electronic health record that can have different consequences on how it's being used in practice. So in philosophy, sometimes this is sort of called the problem of underdetermination of technology, where technological design is underdetermined by the specific ends that it's trying to achieve, and there are actually additional social choices that are made in going into how a technology is designed. And so, for example, with the electronic health record, some people have pointed out that additional choices, for example, choices to use to be able to facilitate collection of administrative data for particular additional functions, or the ability for it to facilitate billing practices, for example, are ways that can cause this technology, which, on the surface you might see as simply just a simple tool that can be used in patient care, to actually diverge from that goal that we often sort of just assume that it's serving the function of. There's a number of other examples that we use in the paper too that kind of are examples of how technologies can be kind of sometimes just seen as straightforward means to an end, but in fact there are additional aspects to them that need to be interrogated and scrutinized in order to ensure that we're not missing additional aspects and we're incorporating them in a thoughtful manner.
Yeah, I like this concept, which we didn't introduce in the paper, but this concept of technological performativity, as opposed to the idea that, let's say, there's a hospital before the electronic health record, and the electronic health record is just kind of implemented and it's an extra feature and it kind of upgrades the hospital. But you can see that there's this whole social, technological, material infrastructure that is created around it. So you have to carry something around, you need different training. Even eye contact with the patient becomes different. If you start a conversation with the patient, you already have like a lot of knowledge about the patient. There's actually been studies about that as well, how it changes social interactions. So it's just something that's kind of interwoven into everything, and it creates this new world instead of it just being something, we have a standard, a status quo, and we can upgrade it or we can make it more efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so obviously we have some ideas about one of the main questions in our paper, or the main question is, because it's written for medical education, is how do we teach critical philosophical orientations towards technology? We don't outline an educational program. Actually, this is one of the things that we discussed a lot. What are we actually doing? But we're kind of sketching the contours of such an educational program, and it has maybe 3 pillars that it would address. I'll name them first, and then maybe we can discuss them. So the first one is technical literacy. The second one has to do with the social construction of technology. So just the example I just gave is an example of social construction, how something comes to life in its use, actually, and it affects also the social interactions. And then the third one is maybe more the philosophical one, which is that it also can change the relationship between the human and the technical. Yeah, why don't we start with the first who wants to talk about technical literacy, what we mean by that? I guess it's you, Ben, because you're also actually the one that during our discussions you had these experiences from practice, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I mean, I think that where we ended up with this paper really benefited from the rich and diverse perspectives that kind of we all got to bring from the various professional experiences and professions that we are within. But the technical literacy pillar, as you mentioned, is one that we really wanted to kind of develop a little bit more of an idea of technical literacy that wasn't simply about competency in being able to use a particular technology. So we didn't want to talk about technical literacy in so much of a narrow sense, but rather understand technology as embedded within a system of practice, and how technical literacy means understanding how actually to fit that particular type of technology and that use of that technology within that broader system of practice. And that includes having an understanding, certainly, of being able to competently apply a particular technology. But it also, importantly, I think, and this is one of the points that we tried to emphasize in the paper, includes understanding when applying such a technology might not be appropriate. It might be necessary to actually forego using a particular technology, or in fact, advocate for not using a particular technology to address a particular problem. And really, that level of literacy takes something a little bit more than just simply being able to be competent in understanding how a technology functions, understanding how it converts inputs into outputs, understanding what narrow sort of problems that it can solve, but rather actually fitting it within a broader system of practice. And that's something I think is really critical as a physician, as a clinician. It's important to really be able to have that more capacious notion of literacy. So that's one of the things that I think we try to address in that pillar. I don't know if any of you want to touch on other aspects of literacy as well, but that was one of the things that we sought to emphasize.
Yeah, I think one of the things too we emphasized is that might relate to this was encouraging trainees to sort of scrutinize the social choices that go into technology, which you've touched on already, Ben. But like, just asking questions like who was included and who was excluded, and what are the unintended consequences, and whose interests do they serve? So I think just having those kinds of questions interrelate to issues and kind of thinking around health equity and give rise to questions about kind of more the social and moral responsibilities of physicians. So to me, that also interweaves a bit with technological literacy, is asking questions about design.
Yeah. I think it also involves because, as I said before, technology is just a container concept. I mean, to ask what is technology, it's really also a philosophical question. And I think one of the parts of technological literacy involves also being able to distinguish between different levels. So I get this image of a river. You have like the boats on the river, like the speedboats and everything. Maybe ChatGPT is like a speedboat, and I don't know, the PC or the laptop is a little bit of a slower boat. Then you have the river current, which is flowing faster, and that could be more the techniques underlying this. So artificial intelligence, computer chips, electricity, just the whole idea of having digital things. So that's something that you could teach. The speedboats you can't keep up with in education, but you can teach about. We do know that artificial intelligence will continue to be a bigger thing. So that's something you can teach about. And then maybe the river bedding is of course also changing as well, but much slower. And that maybe has more to do with a kind of a fundamental relationship between humans and technology. I mean, if you go to your GP, your family physician, I think most people would not accept that you're talking to like a robot or a screen. But there are now instances where you call the doctor's office and you don't get a human voice. You get, first the triage is done through a computer. And that's still now, that kind of changes also the relationship between the doctor and the patient, I think. That's inevitable. But I think literacy means not so much that we tell people what to do or what is better, but that they are able to make these kinds of distinctions and make also these kinds of distinctions of when, the possibility of not using a technology and being able to consider that sometimes the low-tech option is actually better than the high-tech option, right? Yeah, and when I speak like that, it becomes a little bit, all those three pillars, they kind of overlap, right? Because this really touches on the social construction of technology as well.
Yeah, and it touches a lot on the importance of humanism and relationship too, and how we're entangled in the system with technology, but the importance of physician presence too in the healing relationship. And I think of that. You've probably read the paper by John Ayers in JAMA Internal Medicine that went viral on social media recently, where they found that the AI chatbot was more empathetic than physicians. But the study captured only online written interactions. And I don't think we'll ever get to a place where people don't want empathy from a healthcare provider that's mediated through in-person, verbal interactions. So I think that it's sort of almost like an antithesis to a healing interaction because as human beings, we really need that subjective experience of connection for healing. And I think there's an element of emotional relationality to it that's really always important to interweave, I think, into all of these questions around how we're interacting with technology and others in those sort of networks of entanglement.
But it's never either or, right? It's not never like choosing between human and technology, because for this, let's say, this precious interaction between a physician and a patient to take place, we need this whole technological infrastructure, even, just practically just getting there with the car and or being able to do it via video conferencing, but also being able to maybe have some help, technological help with the patients that do not, the problems, how do you say that? The cases that don't really need something, they can be automated to a certain extent. Because if you do that, you also have more time to spend with those patients that really need personal time. So it's never, that's where also I think the literacy comes in, because it's not black and white. It's always a balance.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And like technology has always been with us. It's just made its presence in a different form.
Yeah.
And it feels overwhelming, but it's always been with us. As we've evolved, so has technology. It's just, it feels like it's on a different scale, but it's not. It's always been in our interactions and environment.
Yeah. Still, because I'm also the action editor for this series, and this is, I wrote one paper with Camilo because we care about what is care and, Heidegger. That's one paper that I really wanted to write. But then the paper I thought was most urgent and most important to write, I think it was this one, not because our paper is so good. It's a really good paper, but that's not the reason. But because I think actually it changed now because ChatGPT came out after our paper. And I think it kind of woke people up as well, that we live kind of in a special age, because even the 1980s, when I grew up, you had the PC and that was introduced in the doctor's offices. But it went slow enough that people can adapt and they can reflect on it. They can try different things out. But that has just really, really changed now. There's always been technological innovation, but first it was, there was like, first you had the wheel and then nothing for a while and then something else. And then it was every century and then every decade. And now it's like every year or even faster, something comes out that kind of changes the game. If you just look at social media, how fast it is. But at the same time, it's also becoming more intimate, because we're just recording a podcast right now, which probably wouldn't have been possible 10, 20 years ago this way. And we're having these really nice conversations together. So that's really great as well. But because of that, I think it's something that is often overlooked, because of, maybe you can speak a little bit more about that, Ben, but because of this positivist idea of technology, that is just a means to an end, that it's used, that it's can be a solution to everything. We don't even realize how much we have let it in and how much it not controls, but kind of permeates our lives, and how important it is, just as important as learning about medicine, to also learn about technology as a doctor.
Yeah. No, I agree with all the reflections so far. I think that I was also reflecting on our paper in light of some of the very recent developments in GPT and Laura, like you mentioned, now it being directly researched and applied in trying to be evaluated using at least concepts that we would think are really critical of empathy. Whether or not that was actually what was being evaluated in that study, I think is a different question. But one of the things that we talked about kind of when we were writing this paper was about something you've alluded to already or earlier in the conversation, is this horizon of anticipation of what new technologies are going to look like, and I think this is an example of how something came out that even when we were discussing this this paper and coming up with the ideas for it, this wasn't necessarily on our radar, and we weren't necessarily thinking about GPT in terms of how it would be applied in medicine and medical education. At least directly, we weren't reflecting on that. But I think it speaks to the purpose of and kind of the way that we make our arguments in the paper, that we're not, these ideas, these pillars are not meant to sort of be an approach to critical appraisal of a particular type of technology, but rather they're, as we term it in the paper, they're trying to promote a philosophical orientation towards technology, which really kind of, I think, is one that hopefully will be able to adapt to these rapid changes and be able to kind of continuously apply some of these ideas that we've been discussing in order to evaluate how, as you sort of mentioned, how technologies are becoming embedded in practice, and making sure that decisions to incorporate technologies into practice are motivated by the right reasons, and not simply just because they're there, not simply just because they're expedient for particular profit motives or other things like that, but really actually are motivated by sound decisions to try to improve the lives of patients, improve the lives of communities. And so the worry is that, to go back to your initial question, the positivist view, the worry is that simply it can kind of engender this sort of solutionist perspective, where it's sort of more technology is always going to be better, because we should be basing our practice on the latest science, and technology is simply an extension of that science. And I really think that doesn't capture all considerations that are really critical to bring to bear here.
Laura, what do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic has it taught us something about this relationship between the human and the technical, and how, what is important about that?
Well, I think, it brings me back to some of the writing we did in our paper around touch, and, how touch was really diminished in medicine during COVID. And we quote the writer Sergio Del Molino, who writes, "We humans need to touch and be touched, and we don't know how to love without it. Distance makes us cold and makes us care less about one another." And then we go on to talk about how in the Netherlands during the first wave of COVID, when society was locked down, there was actually a term popularized called weed hunger. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
This is funny, because this sound that I'm gonna make, I think it only exists in Dutch. It's UI. It's called ui.
Okay.
And it's called huidhonger.
Oh, I really got that wrong.
skin hunger. So you're hungry. It's like a double meaning. Your skin is hungry to touch another skin, but it's also like hunger for skin.
Right.
And it wasn't anything sexual. It was just like people just wanted to touch another human being.
Yeah, that's right. And so, I think coming back to this sort of idea of technification, and touching a bit on your critique of a positivist lens, Benjamin, I think we tend to see the human through a positivist lens as sort of in a binary opposition from technology. But, the way that we are framing in the paper is that we're very much entangled with technology, and at the same time, what that does is it encourages us to think about, well, then what is it to be human? Like, how are human beings different from technology? And, I think when we think about creating a human bond, we don't really still fully perhaps understand scientifically what it is to be human, to have a human presence, and to sort of have a human energy that underpins the subjective experience of the other. And so I think still, as we advance technology, I think we also need to think more about, what is it to have a human presence? And I think those are really interesting questions that are being pushed forward, or might be pushed forward more when we think about sort of this, the relationship of humans and technology, and asking questions about, well, then what does it mean to be human, and what is a human presence?
Yeah, so that should be clear now why it's such a philosophical topic, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
It really connects to, two of my favorite philosophers write a lot about technology, which are Martin Heidegger and Bernard Stiegler. Yeah, this question of what is it to be human, one of the concepts of Stiegler related to technology actually really connects to medicine, because it's called the pharmacon, but that's kind of the same root as pharmacological. So he says technology is pharmacological. So just like medicine, it can be potion and poison. And just like with medicine, you need pharmacology. And pharmacology, I'm probably saying this wrong, but I imagine it's like the science of, it's basically technological literacy. But it's also a form of care. So technology is not something that is stable and independent of us, but it's something that it isn't quite alive, but it's not organic, but it's organized and it really influences our lives. So it's something we have to keep our eye on it, and we have to care for it, just as we care for medicine and we study it and we find out, oh, actually this medical intervention or this medicine that we thought was really good, actually we should change it, or we can, there are some side effects that we didn't know. I think this is one of the insights that's really necessary now, that technology is so essential, that we need kind of a pharmacology of technology in medical education as well. And the other part of it is that we can see every technology has its side effects. So when the PC was introduced, this also meant in the GP's office that you have differences in eye contact. When you're looking at the computer screen or the electronic health record, you're not looking at the patient. You win something, but you also lose something. Just like Plato already said, that writing is great because you can remember things, but also because you can write it down, you don't train your memory anymore. So you also kind of lose something. And we can actually see this on a very large scale as well in the climate crisis, because the climate crisis is not caused by, humans farting or whatever. It's caused by the Industrial Revolution and the technology and the CO2 emissions. And if we just look at the healthcare industry, if the healthcare industry was collectively one country, it would be the 5th most polluting country in the world. And in the Netherlands, it's responsible for 7% of the national CO2 emissions, of 4% of the waste, 13% of the raw materials. I mean, that's quite a large percentage. But if you then take into account that, like, the primary job of healthcare is to cure and to take care, then this is this is an irony of medicine. But it's also something that we cannot escape. But we need to, obviously with planetary health and everything, these kind of things come into perspective as well.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Mario.
So yeah, maybe just for the last few minutes, we can just talk about what are some of the ideas that listeners can take away. What are our thoughts about taking this forward in education or in practice?
Well, I think one of the main upshots, and maybe this reflects more my bias as a philosopher, but I do think that the disciplines like the humanities in general, and I think philosophy in particular, have a lot to offer here. These are disciplines that have long thought about things like the social impact of technology, things like scrutinizing both science and technology, thinking critically about how values enter into these institutions, and how we can better orient them, and in order to better address human need. And I think that extending some ideas from these areas, and in really incorporating some teaching and into medical curricula from the humanities, which is something that's already happening, and I think that is a very positive trend, is something that can really help. And I think that this can be done specifically with an eye to looking at fields like philosophy of technology, like the ethics of AI, these sorts of areas. There's lots of really great scholars who are far more intelligent than myself, who have offered a lot of very interesting ideas in these areas, and a lot of this could really be applied to the medical field and to teaching the future generation of healthcare professionals. So that's a plug for the humanities in philosophy. It may be a little too abstract for what you were thinking in terms of the concrete things, but I want to keep it on this level, because that is kind of the gist of our paper as well, to sort of try to promote an orientation rather than a specific curricular innovation. That being said, said, Laura or Mari, I don't know if you have any more specific or tangible things you wanted to suggest.
No, I agree. I think we stayed away from anything too prescriptive, and I think some of the questions I was interested in our conversations from my own perspective as someone interested in the social and relational aspects of the paper that we wrote. I was thinking when we think critically about philosophical questions about technology, again, it to me really asks questions too about what it is to be human in form connection. And so questions like how can physicians and learners respond intuitively to patients and not just focus again on technification like diagnosis and prognosis and sort of this more detached, automated or algorithmic way without eye contact, Mario, for example. And so what does it look like to interact sensitively with patients when the interaction is mediated through technology? And how can physicians, become even more aware of their presence and how it might be experienced by a patient, I think, are some of the questions that came up for me when we were working together.
And also what you're saying is don't reinvent the wheel, because sometimes in medical education, there's a tendency to, if we realize something is important, we're going to do our own research, we're going to do our own thing. But there's a field called technology assessment. There's a field called science and technology studies. There's philosophy of technology. And yeah, there are all these experts that you can just, if you want to implement an educational program, invite
Absolutely,
them
yeah.
and put the people together like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really well put, Mario. Absolutely. I think that, yes, there's a rich scholarship in these areas. And I think that really, and maybe this relates to kind of our own endeavor in writing this paper, that, I think there's tremendous opportunities for these rich interdisciplinary collaborations to kind of emerge in this space because yes, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's fields that have been thinking about these problems for a long time. Believe it or not, before the advent of ChatGPT, people had been thinking about problems that AI might pose in terms of in ethical issues, and I think that we'd be remiss not to really draw on insights from people who are working in these areas and are thinking critically about these problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think drawing on those perspectives too just encourages this sense of lifelong learning in terms of being at the edge of doubt always and thinking critically about new technologies that come into the fold. And so it's more of an orientation and a practice of thinking critically rather than just accepting in this sort of numb way unconsciously new technologies.
Yeah, I was thinking about what can I suggest for embedding this in a curriculum, but rather than saying, look, do this or do this, I just want to stress the urgency. And I don't really know how to do that, but it's like, because this is, I guess, one of the last podcasts of this series as well, because we've pretty much discussed all the papers in the series. I really think this is the most, it's urgent because people are not paying attention to it as much as they should. If the way technology is treated would be treated with medicine, there would be like riots on the street because it's so irresponsible. And ChatGPT is just a very, as far as I can tell, very innocent thing of well, we don't really know what's coming. But the thing is that if we keep sticking to this idea that Ben called the positivist view, it has its value as well, but it's a very narrow view of technology that just fails to see a lot of its side effects. And we saw some of that, with how quickly after COVID-19 pandemic teaching went online. And in a lot of places, the administrator said, well, actually, we saved a lot of costs, so let's keep teaching online. But you lose so much. So it's not any one thing. I just want to say, well, this really should have much more priority than it has now in most medical curricula.
Yeah, I think just to I would second that, Mario, and I would say that these are not, there tends to be sometimes I think when people are thinking about the impacts of technology, or specifically this arises with thinking about the ethical impacts or the adverse consequences of applying AI to particular problems, people often tend to become preoccupied with sort of what some might consider more remote scenarios of these problems of existential threats with respect to technologies like ChatGPT or other potential AI gaining agency and posing threats. But I think that there are very real and material impacts that these technologies are having in day-to-day life right now, actually. And as you sort of alluded to, Mario, with talking about climate as one I think crucial aspect, the environmental impact of technology, certainly one that still is not garnering enough attention. And then I think in the healthcare scenario, that's also an aspect. But there's many tangible impacts that technologies are having today that deserve and merit urgent attention. That go. That we don't need to wait and think so hard. Now, again, I'm not saying that these people who are working and thinking about some of the long-term or remote scenarios are as not valuable work, but I'm just saying that there's more material and immediate things that also deserve our attention in this area too.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for writing this paper together, because I learned so much, and it was really nice, this combination of different perspectives.
Thank you so much. It was really fun working on this together.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really invigorating and a lot of fun to work together and bring in our different perspectives.
Thank you for listening. Check out our book, Helping a Field See Itself, Envisioning a Philosophy of Medical Education. You can find out more about the work I do at marioveen.com. And if you're interested in philosophy and interdisciplinarity, you can listen to my other podcast, which is called Live from Plato's Cave.